Welcome back to Selling Your Business with David King. I'm David King, the author of my book, Selling Your Business, Begin with the End in Mind. Today, I am lucky to be joined by my good friend, Scott Chelberg. Scott is the president of Retirement Solutions, Inc. in lovely Carlsbad, California. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, David. Such a pleasure to join you today.
Scott, I understand you need to make a quick disclosure, professional obligation here.
I do. I just want to let everybody know that I do, as a registered representative of a broker-dealer, I have to read this off real quick. It's just securities and investment advisory services are offered through my broker-dealer, SagePoint Financial, who's a member of FINRA and SIPC. And my investment advisory services are offered through my RIA, the Ameriflex Group, an independent registered investment advisor. Now, SagePoint is separately owned, and other entities and/or marketing names, products, and services referenced here are independent of SagePoint, and insurance is offered independent of SagePoint. And that's all I have to say about the disclosure, but thanks for letting me get that in.
Wonderful. Those damn lawyers.
I know it, right? Compliance, compliance, compliance.
Yeah. So Scott is, as I said, a good friend of mine. And Scott is someone who's always got his eye on the global economy, the markets. He has encyclopedic knowledge of what's going on a day-to-day basis. He's one of the few people who can really know most of everything you need to know without being a know-it-all. And I guess that probably comes from his background of going to the University of Nebraska, where you know what the N on the side of the helmet stands for.
I love it. It does stand for knowledge.
It stands for knowledge. And as a good segue there, Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into finance?
Well, that's interesting. So I did graduate from University of Nebraska back in 1985. And at that time, I had been counseled by some mentors of mine from my fraternity, an SAE, and they said to look into financial planning and not investment advisory or brokerage business, and which I did. And so they said the first thing to do is find out where you want to live and build a place and build a business there. Don't worry about what company you start with. So I set out to find the best place I could to possibly live. And driving through Solana Beach and into Cardiff, I recognized that area and said, this is exactly where I want to live. In July of 1985, I got my licenses here and through FINRA and NASD and started practice. So pretty much about 25 days from today, I'll have my 35th anniversary of being in the business.
You have been in Carlsbad, the North County, San Diego area for your whole career from the very beginning?
Actually, I started, my first office was in Encinitas, and then I moved down to High Bluff Drive. And then in 2000, I moved back up to the Carlsbad area where I had been for a couple of years in between there. And I'm still in the same building right off Owens Avenue off of Palomarport Road since 2000. So yeah, I've been very fortunate to be able to stay in the North County and build a nice clientele base, although we are in about 12 states or more license-wise. Most of our clients are really coming from the North Coastal area.
Got it. Yeah, that's very fortunate to come to one area, build a business, and stay in the same location for this long. You're fortunate. Tell me more about Retirement Solutions, Inc.
Well, Retirement Solutions, Inc. is really just a DBA, which I own. But what we do here is really specialize in advising successful individuals and high net worth individuals, oftentimes business owners, in preparing for and then transitioning into their retirement. There's a lot of good advisors out there that can help you accumulate and grow your wealth. But most accidents coming down any major mountain, whether it's Mount Whitney or any other mountain, happen on the way down. And so what we do is we specialize on the deaccumulation phase or the income distribution phase of life. So we're quite different in that regard.
And Can you describe the range of services that you offer over at Retirement Solutions?
Yeah, we're engaged one of two ways. The most common way is we actually do a full service financial plan for a fee. And then coupled with that, we design the portfolio and hire the proper managers, the institutional managers, to manage those assets for our clients. And then we keep the client on track to their goals. As I like to say, the financial plan drives the portfolio. I can't imagine anybody getting investment advice without having a financial plan and having that advisor know all about all of their affairs, and most importantly, their tax situation and their entities that they own, etc. So that's the most common way with the financial plan and the money management. The second way is people come to us and just say, hey, we need help with our investments, and we're happy to do that. But we do what we refer to as a mini plan. So it's a discovery, so we have enough information to really drive the portfolio with the mini plan.
And you mentioned business owners. Typical business owner, the most common, what are the most common services you provide for entrepreneurs 10, 20 years out? They own a business. What are the typical services that you're providing?
Well, oftentimes we're brought in by one of their other trusted advisors. So whether that's an estate planning attorney or a banker or perhaps a health insurance broker, whoever already has that trusted relationship with the business owner, and they simply ask the question, when do you plan on exiting your business? And hopefully they've read your book and understand that they need to begin with the end in mind. And so they've done that. But unfortunately, as you probably can attest to, most have not. And so when we're introduced to them, we help them understand, what do they have in the way of a business, and what do they need when they're retired? And just starting that conversation. And I've come up with a 10-point questionnaire that I often send business owners and say, hey, you know what? Just go through this. It takes about 4 or 5 minutes. And depending on how you score, you're either a long ways down your exit planning process, or you need some help and some guidance, and maybe we can bring in some players, other trusted advisors to help you along the way, or you just need to start from scratch and really get it going. So we start with that, and we start with the financial plan to understand what they need. As you probably are aware, a lot of business owners run a lot of expenses through their business that aren't going to go away because they're retired, right? So and there's some big expenses that they run through the business, whether it's their health insurance, some travel, automobile expenses, things like that can really add up, let alone all kinds of different subscriptions, whether that's software subscriptions and things like that, or educational subscriptions. So we try to break it down so we understand what it really costs to support their lifestyle, and what's that lifestyle going to look like in retirement. I like to say retirement's kind of like every day's a Saturday. So you spend a lot of money when you go to the store on Saturday, and you're going to Home Depot, and you're going to the grocery store and getting all your errands run. So if every day is a Saturday, you have to be prepared for all those things you want to do and make sure you build that into your plan. Otherwise, you're going to have what I call a porch sitting retirement. And no one wants to sit on their porch and not really live out their retirement.
Right. Wonderful. Now, if you're working with a business owner, ideally, how many years do you have to start the plan so that you can get something solid in place before they exit the business?
Well, at minimum, we like a year, and preferably we like many more. I like to say if you can give me 6 years in advance, we have a pretty full toolbox to use. And we can get involved with different kinds of programs where you can actually pull some money out of the business in a tax efficient manner, whether that's through retirement plans like 401ks, profit sharing plans, cash balance plans, defined benefit plans. Very effective way to pull cash out of the business tax effectively or tax efficiently. But if you don't have that much time, if it is your last year, then we still need to understand the tax consequences of the sale, how it's going to be structured, and is your business really at its peak operating capacity so you can get maximum value? And sometimes that's going to take more than a year to get all of those experts in to guide you to get that maximum dollar amount. But once we've identified what you need, and now we know what you have, and if those two, there's not a gap between them, then you might as well pull the trigger and sell the business, because otherwise you're just leaving risk on the table. Because you could have a COVID event, which no one saw coming in 2020, could severely impact the value of your business. We saw in 2008, the Great Recession. A lot of people had to step back from selling their business because the value just wasn't there. So once you reach that value that can close that gap of what you need and what you have, it's time to pull the trigger.
And with business owners, either anecdotally or if you've ever done any quantitative analysis of this, how much of their net worth do you typically see invested or wrapped up in the business itself? Let's say we're talking small to mid-market businesses here, not owners of big businesses with other owners, but maybe one or two owners, mid-sized company. How much of their net worth do they typically have wrapped up in the company?
Well, typically, if their business is worth a couple $1 million, then it's probably about 20, 25%. But most of the business owners that we're working with are selling businesses between 20 and 50 million. And so it represents more like 10 to 20% of their net worth. I'm sorry, so 80 to 90% of their net worth. So much, much higher. The other thing about that is it's also the easiest way for that business owner to close that gap it's not going to be saving more money or investing more money. It's really pouring that money back into the business in a way that you can pump up that value to get to that, to close that gap, to get the number you need for the sale.
Rolling back a little bit on something you mentioned, the retirement and getting the Saturday retirement and getting the retirement that people dream of, what they want. I don't know if you've read Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Work Week, or if you're familiar with his philosophies, but that had a big impact on me. And the idea of being able to take several smaller retirements and enjoy, the fruits of your wealth at various points throughout your life, before you're more senior. How often do you see business owners who are in any sort of position where they could actually do that? They own a business, they're heavily involved in it, but how often do you see ones who could take a sabbatical for a couple of years or even a month and just go away and do what they want to do, then come back to their business they own?
That's an interesting concept, David. And unfortunately, we don't see that very often. But when we do work with the younger business owners, so the late 30s into the 40s and early 50s, oftentimes in our discovery interview, we identify that that's one of their objectives. And so we call it a self-managed business. And I don't mean that the business owner is not involved in the management. I just mean that everybody that's working at that business understands their role and is self-managed. No one really needs to be managing anybody in that business. And that allows the freedom for that business owner to do those long vacations, those 3, 4, 5 month sabbaticals, or maybe even a year. And then they come back, and oftentimes they've learned some weak spots in their business. And unfortunately, hopefully they didn't go down in business, but sometimes they learned that, things are running just fine and I have all the systems in place. And that's when you really know you are more of an investor in your business and not the operator of your business. And that's when you really have some value there to sell.
Yeah. But when I'm working with business owners and, the advice comes up, could this business really thrive without you? If the answer to that question is not a yes, do you really have a business or do you have a job? If this is owner operated and it's indispensable from what you're bringing to the table, is this something you're going to be able to sell or just kind of liquidate or sell for a pretty low price here? That it's, have you grown this enough to sell that somebody else can come in and take over the value? It's kind of an issue of the maturity of the business, but that's something people need to be planning from the very beginning. do you see a lot of business owners who've built it where they're so, inseparable from the company? The company is so dependent upon their management that it's going to be difficult to get much value out of an exit.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of coming in early enough where you can really help that business owner figure out, what type of team does he need to build, and compare that to the players that he has on the team, and who's developable, who can you develop into those positions, and who do you need to get rid of, and then what positions do you need to fill and at what level. And so, as you know, we have experts and provisors that's what they do. And so having somebody come in with an assessment and do that for the business owner, and that becomes part of the plan, right? So part of the exit plan is really developing that value in the business. And that means removing that business owner from the day-to-day operations as much as possible. And they become more of an investor. Again, that role is a self-managed company.
And we always like to be working on situations that are good situations, the ideal, the dream, and helping people achieve something that's going as planned. But often it doesn't work out that way. We get called into situations that are bad situations, things that have unexpected events like COVID, and then say someone has a health problem or the business owners go sideways with each owner. Do you work with people who have got to kind of make the best of a bad situation and try to find value, even though it's not an ideal exit?
Absolutely. We hope that we don't be put in those kind of situations, but oftentimes we are. Through the planning process, we call them the big 3 Ds, right? So you have the death, the divorce, and the disability. And if that happens to any major player or owner in the business, hopefully you've had some counseling and have a buy-sell agreement in place, and that buy-sell agreement's properly funded with the different types of insurance, whether it's disability or life insurance. But if we come in after the fact, and we're working on a case right now where the gentleman's hiring us just because he's getting up in age in his late 60s and not in the best of health, and he's really concerned about making sure that everything's in place for his wife. So it's going to be a fun case because there's multiple businesses and multiple reoccurring business income streams, but he's uninsurable. So we just need to make sure that we have all the planning done so those businesses can survive post the current owner and take good care of his surviving spouse.
Is there any general advice that you would give business owners early on that they can hang on to the whole way so that they'll be in a desirable position when they come to you and start working on their exit plan?
Well, I think that there's a lot of good content out there to understand if you really have a business. I think what you laid out in your book is really, really helpful when you talk about the different stages. Now, the second half of that gets into the details of the deal, but the front end, really just the whole concept of beginning with the end in mind and choosing the correct entity and what's your game plan and exit, that's just absolute brilliance. And if you can get that information in the hands of the business owner early on, and they build a good, trusted team, a team of trusted advisors that coach them along the way, that actually do real tax planning, they're not a historian. They actually look at your income taxes and say, okay, we need to do some planning for this year. And they look at the valuation and what really drives the value of your business and focus in on that, understanding all the details of the accounting, your cost of goods sold, and all of that. And so if you can build a team around you with that goal in mind of exiting at a certain number, you have a much higher probability of making that happen than without a plan. It's no different than jumping in the car and saying, you know what, I want to drive from San Diego to New York City. And if you have a GPS, which is your guide, you're going to have a pretty good time. Whereas if you don't, you just kind of wing it, you're probably going to find yourself lost a few times, and that's frustrating. Waste time, waste resources. So start out with a good plan, trust some good advisors, and you're going to be on your way to success right there.
It's certainly helpful if people have advisors early on and build that institutional knowledge. They've got a CPA who's qualified to see them through to the end, if they've got an attorney, if they've got an estate planning attorney. With the work that you do, helping people plan to exit, which advisor do you typically work with most closely?
Well, what we find is the first person that we typically work with closest is the estate planning attorney, because a lot of them do not have their estate planning documents up to date, or they don't have a living trust or anything drafted at all. Or they have one, but it's one of those from a cookie cutter shop. And it's really sad. There's an enormous amount of estate planners out there that do not properly deal with the business as an entity and what's going to happen with that business. And as we mentioned earlier, it could be 70, 80, 90% of your net worth. So the estate planner is really key. The second component then is working with the CPA and making sure that the books are in good order, and we understand that what kind of tools can put in place to minimize income taxes for the business and the business owner. And then after that, we go around the circle in what I refer to as more satellite advisors, where we can make sure that their benefits are all up to snuff and all their business commercial insurance is good and their personal insurance is all in good order. So oftentimes people miss the fact that they don't even have an umbrella policy, and they're worth multiple millions of dollars. They might have some rentals. They don't have them owned by entities. Again, they're not doing any asset protection. So again, that comes back to the estate planning attorney when you're getting into the asset protection. So those are the most common players that we work with early on. And then in our 6-step retirement solution strategy, once we get into the advanced plan, that's when we identify all the other players. As I mentioned earlier, you might need to build a team out. So you need to bring the players in to identify what kind of team players you have. Are they a good fit? How do we go about replacing them, hiring and firing, and all of that fun stuff? And that can be, and then when you get closer to the deal, you need to make sure that you have a good investment banker involved that can get you top dollar, and a transaction attorney to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, and you're looking out for the best interest of the seller.
And you're describing a situation which will go together perfectly here, like a Swiss watch. But often I've found that people, even if they may have a CPA who was qualified to prepare their individual returns. They've done, good work for a number of years, but they may not be an expert in taxes on M&A transactions, or even with a well-qualified CPA. Scott, do you find your CPA doesn't know what you don't tell them? And if people don't get with their tax advisor and say, I'm looking to sell within so many years, what do I do about it? That the tax planning, the time for tax planning has come and gone. And often there's not a whole lot they can do late in the game to mitigate the big gain that they're going to take. You see that very often?
Yeah, we do. And that's the beauty of what we do in the advanced planning part. We call that the advanced plan. So we do wealth enhancement, which is tax mitigation and exit planning. And then we get into wealth transfer, right? So you're transferring some of the value to, maybe you can use some discounting methods into partnerships, or you're going to be transferring it to the next generation, or you're going to be transferring it to some key employers and key employees. They're going to be taking over the business. Then the wealth protection comes into place, right? So you need business contingency planning, especially if you have partners. As I talked about, the big 3Ds, divorce, disability, and death. You need to make sure that's all dealt with. And then legal structures. Do you have the right legal structures? And whatever proper way to utilize insurance to transfer the risk there. And then you can't forget about the charitable giving or the plan giving, because there's a lot of great tools that can help you avoid paying capital gains tax on the sale of a portion or all of your business. And there's now the new opportunity zones that can mitigate some of the capital gains, at least defer it, and allow you to use all the capital to continue to grow versus paying capital gains right away. So understanding all those different tools is really a key component when we bring in a good CPA. They're not there to say no, they're there to say, oh, wow, I didn't know about this, I'm willing to learn. And that's a challenge, I'll be honest. It's tough to find good CPAs that do that. Oftentimes they kind of get stuck in the way, go, oh no, that's just a deferred comp plan, those don't work. And they don't even know what it really is. So we have to educate them. And if they're not willing to be educated, then they're probably not the best fit for the client. And so now we're in the position of driving a wedge in between their trusted advisor and the owner of the business, and knowing that they need more advanced help. They need somebody who's really qualified.
Now, Scott, you touched on deferred comp plans, and that's something I wanted to ask you specifically about. How often do you find that people are planning early enough that they can get a defined benefit plan or any other sort of retirement plan and be able to defer a large amount of the gain into the future?
We do that quite often if we have time, right? And if we don't have time, it's typically because the business owner's older in age and highly compensated. And depending on what the census is, the makeup of the employee pool, then we can go to a good third-party administrator and we can run different tests to see what kind of plan is going to work best for this owner. Defined benefit plans are fantastic for the older owners if they don't have a lot of highly compensated, and if they have lower compensated and younger employees, they can put a lot of money away, $250,000+, $230,000 this year. But that being said, the deferred comp is a different tool, and there are different strategies to use that may or may not be tax advantaged today. But there's one tool that we like. It's kind of like a Roth, where you think about when we get to the stage where now we're replacing the income that they used to take out of the business because they sold the business. It's nice to have two levers. One lever where we're taking the money out of a taxable account, like a 401k IRA, that's all going to be taxed. And it's nice to have another lever where we can take it out of, say, something that's tax-free, like a Roth or a life insurance plan. And so we can really help manage the individual's taxes because we have those tools. And you have to put those tools in place early enough to be able to have enough time to fund them and have the capital grow in them to make them worthwhile. I'm from Nebraska, as you mentioned earlier, and I always like to ask the business owner, would you prefer to pay the taxes on the seed, or would you prefer to pay the taxes on the crop? Because the 401k and all the defined contribution plans, what you're doing there is you're paying the taxes on the crop. You're getting the tax deduction up front with that small contribution, but then the big money that's coming out is going to be taxable. Whereas if you had a Roth IRA or you use proper structured life insurance, you actually pay the tax on the front end, you pay it on the seed, and then you get the entire harvest tax-free. And so you need some time to fund those plans, but they're incredibly powerful.
Death and taxes, gotta prepare for both of them.
You do.
So in general, and not to stereotype or to broadly generalize too much here, but I see a lot of cases where younger business owners will look to sell or start planning to sell too soon. And a lot of business owners who've held on for years and build their lives around their businesses often hold on and wait either to start planning or to try to close a sale until it's too late. I assume, Scott, you probably see some of the same.
Absolutely. We can tell you stories about younger business owners, and it's kind of fun when it's successful, but it's terribly sad when it's not. So, they sell their business and they end up taking stock in the buying company, and then that gets run into the ground, and so they end up with nothing. Very unfortunate. So the structure of the sale is incredibly important. But then you have those young serial entrepreneurs that are successful, and they sell a business, they go off to Costa Rica for a year, they rediscover a new idea, they come back, they build another company. 5, 7 years later, they sell that, they take another sabbatical, they figure out what the next area they're going to specialize in and develop a company that solves another problem. Those are really fun people to work with. On the older side, all they have to really do is help them understand that they need a written plan to follow. And if they're open-minded enough to have that, and then we can guide them by bringing in the other trusted advisors, we're definitely going to increase their probability of having a successful exit.
Do you notice any common factors in the lives or the personalities of these business owners who don't plan to sell early enough? The more senior owners who are reluctant to go down this path. Do you see factors that tend to make them delay this process?
Well, I think it's pretty common. Oftentimes, it's the male business owner, and their business is their baby, and they've been at it for a long time, and they've sacrificed a lot, right? They've missed their child's recitals and ball games and other events because they had things to do with the business. And so that now business becomes a real big part of who they are, their personality, and all of that. And there's a subconscious part of parting ways with that. So we oftentimes talk about a quality of life enhancement exercise. As we get closer to the exit, we like to work with the business owner and identify some key areas that they cannot delegate. And that's really important. So obviously your health comes to mind. You can't delegate your health. You can't tell somebody, say, hey, would you make sure you eat broccoli instead of that chocolate cake? You need to make sure that I work out. Would you work out for me? You can't delegate your health. You can't delegate your spiritual beliefs and your development of your spiritual beliefs. You can't delegate your relationships. Maybe it's time to go back and spend more time with your children, even though they're grown or you have grandchildren. So we put a plan together that really focuses on what's important to them, that's outside of their business, that they cannot delegate. And oftentimes, once we get them into the plan, they find that they don't even have time to run their business. This is like too much fun doing all this other stuff. I'm volunteering on charitable organizations and I'm on boards, and they have so much more, they have more energy in their life because they broadened it away from their business. And so if you can catch somebody that's open enough to do that, you can really enhance the quality of life, because what you don't want to do is have that business owner, that typical older male, come home and then start bossing everybody around in his house, in his kitchen, because that's mom's area. And so you're just going to cause trouble, and you don't need to do that. You need to be able to pre-design your life and your hobbies and your interests and start exploring those areas before you actually put the for sale sign up. So when the sales closed, you're so busy having so much fun that you're not going to miss going into the office, and you're not going to really relate to the fact that you lost a big chunk of your personality or who you are.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. So I'm glad you went down that path. It might, when you make the exit decision, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and get the number of a good marriage and family therapist, so that this transition is one that you can both be happy to get through together. So anyway, Scott, thank you so much for joining me. It's always drinking from a fire hose when I'm able to soak in your wisdom. But one parting thought here, as you know, we're watching the markets and we're watching the economy and watching this COVID lockdown. What advice would you give people who are filled with trepidation at this moment out there, wondering what they should be doing? Should they sit on their cash? Should they be putting more into the markets? Is there any general advice you would give to most people out there today?
Well, the big thing right now is to take control. And I know that sounds silly in a pandemic situation that we're in, but the way you can take control is by having a plan. And if you have a plan and you execute that plan, you're now in control. The plan's going to drive your portfolio. Make sure your portfolio has the appropriate amount of risk. If you don't need to take risk, then don't take risk. But understand exactly how much risk you have in your portfolio. In a typical portfolio, you need to have some advanced tools in there that mitigate the risk. You just can't go buy 60-40 portfolio of stocks and bonds and write it out, especially as you get closer to retirement. We call it the red zone, very much like a football in the red zone. You're 5 years out from your retirement, or you're 5 years into your retirement. You really need to be mistake-free during that time frame. Because if you're not, you're going to really penalize yourself for the rest of your life. If you make a mistake when you're 90, yeah, you're probably going to be okay. You make a mistake the year that you retire, you planned on retiring March 23rd this year when the market bottomed, you better have had a really well-designed plan and a really well-designed portfolio. So my advice is get back in the game and take control.
Great advice. And I can say with 100% confidence that anyone who works with Scott will have a good, solid plan in place, and that you're in good hands with Scott. Scott, would you like to mention the website of Retirement Solutions?
Yeah, it's www.2 the number and RSI as Retirement Solutions Incorporated.com. David,
Excellent.
Thank you so much. You're just a natural at this.
Thanks so much. You're very generous. And with that, I'm David King. This is Selling Your Business. Be well.